merchant vessel Golden Hope spun helplessly through the black void. Her once-proud hull, now resembling a grotesque metal flower torn apart by cosmic winds. Emergency lights cast eerie red shadows across the bridge as Captain Nex dragged his bleeding scaled body toward the communications console. Each breath sent sharp pain through his chest where Vorthan energy blasts had nearly killed him. 3 hours ago, his clawed fingers trembled as he activated the emergency beacon for the 100th time. The same desperate plea echoed into the emptiness of space, a prayer cast into an indifferent universe. "This is Captain Nex of the trading ship Golden Hope. Mayday, mayday. Warthon slavers have us surrounded. They've taken half my crew. If anyone can hear this transmission, please, in the name of all that's sacred, help us." The bridge reeked of burnt circuits and fear. What remained of his crew huddled behind overturned consoles, their eyes hollow. With the knowledge of what awaited them, Vorthans weren't ordinary pirates seeking cargo or ransom. They were flesh merchants, dealing in the most valuable currency in the Outer Rim living beings. Young Crix, barely out of the academy, whimpered softly in the corner. The kid had joined the merchant fleet dreaming of adventure among the stars. Now he'd probably end his days in some alien gladiator pit if he was lucky. The unlucky ones became household slaves, their spirits broken long before their bodies gave out. Captain Nex had seen it before. The Vorthans were methodical in their cruelty, taking crews in waves to keep the survivors compliant. First, they'd taken his security chief and half the cargo handlers. Then his navigator and the medical staff. Each group beamed away, while the rest watched helplessly, knowing their turn was coming. But here's the thing about hope: it's the cruelest emotion in the galaxy. Just when you think it's dead, it flickers back to life like a dying star going supernova, Captain. It's communications. Officer Zek suddenly straightened at his station. The young Altarian's voice cracked with disbelief. "I'm detecting a response to our distress call." "It's impossible, sir." Dex felt his twin hearts skip a beat. In all his years commanding merchant vessels, he'd never received help this far out in the Rim territories. The Galactic Union's patrol ships rarely ventured beyond the core worlds, leaving traders like him to face pirates alone. "Where's it coming from?" he asked, afraid to hope. Zek's tentacles danced over his console, his expression growing more confused. "By the second, that's just it, Captain. The signal originates from a quarantined system. Designation Cell 3, also known as Terra." The bridge fell dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop in a black hole. Every civilized being in the galaxy knew about the quarantined worlds. Planets so hostile, so utterly brutal, that the dominant species had evolved into living weapons. The Galactic Union had sealed away these death worlds 3 centuries ago after first contact nearly triggered a galactic war. The creatures that emerged from these hellscapes were walking nightmares beings, forged in crucibles of violence that defied comprehension. Terra was the worst of them all. A world where everything wanted to kill everything else, where the dominant species had actually survived by becoming apex predators. The official records were classified, but rumors spoke of creatures that hunted in packs, used tools as weapons, and showed a disturbing tendency toward organized violence. "What does the message say?" Vex whispered, his voice barely audible. Above the ship's dying systems, Zek swallowed hard, his skin shifting to the pale blue of terror. "It's brief, Captain. Just for words. Message received. Fleet en route. Do not surrender. We're coming." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Or maybe a promise of salvation. It was impossible to tell which. Outside the viewports, the Vorthan warships continued their lazy patrol, their sleek hulls gleaming with the confidence of predators who had already claimed their prey. "Commander." Vexstar's flagship, the Blood Harvester, dominated the formation, a massive dreadnought capable of glassing entire colonies. Its cargo bays were already half full with previous victims, beings who would never see their homeworlds again. But something had changed. The universe had shifted, and none of them realized it yet. Captain Nex looked around his bridge at the terrified faces of his remaining crew. These weren't soldiers or warriors, they were traders, explorers. Dreamers who'd ventured into space seeking profit and adventure. They didn't deserve this fate, and now, somewhere in the darkness between stars, something was coming. Something. From a world so terrible that an entire galaxy had agreed to lock it away and forget it existed. The question wasn't whether help was coming. The message had confirmed that. The real question was whether salvation from Deathworlders was better than slavery to pirates. Because everyone knew the old saying, when you invite monsters to fight monsters, you'd better pray you're on the right side when the blood stops flowing. What none of them could imagine was that they were about to witness something unprecedented. In galactic history, the moment when humanity's self-imposed exile came to an end, and the universe remembered why some cages aren't meant to hold... Reality screamed as 47 human warships tore through the fabric of space itself, their hyperspace engines leaving wounds in the universe that glowed like angry scars. Admiral Jack Morgan gripped the command rail of the Defiant as his ship emerged from the interdimensional tunnel, his weathered face set in the kind of expression that had made enemy generals surrender without firing a shot. The human fleet spread out in perfect formation, not the flashy, ceremonial arrangements favored by galactic navies, but the cold, mathematical precision of apex predators positioning themselves for a kill. These weren't the elegant, artistic vessels that graced recruitment posters across civilized space. No golden holes or crystalline spires here. The human ships looked like what they were, instruments of war forged by a species that had learned violence in Earth's crucible. "Jesus Christ," whispered Lieutenant Sarah Brooks from her tactical station, staring at the sensor readings. 83 Vorthan ships. Admiral, they've got us outnumbered almost 2-1. Jack's laugh was dry as desert wind. "Sarah, you're thinking like a civilized being? Out here, numbers don't mean what they used to." He'd seen this before alien. Species that had grown soft in their comfortable corner of the galaxy, forgetting that the universe was fundamentally hostile to life. The main view screen flickered to life, revealing the bridge of the Vorthan flagship. Commander Vexstar lounged in his command, throned like some reptilian emperor, his scaled hide gleaming with bioluminescent patterns that pulsed with amusement. The alien's eyes were cold, calculating the eyes of something that had made a career out of breaking other beings. Well, Vexstar hissed, his forked tongue flicking out to taste the air. "A Deathworlder fleet. How, quaint. I am Commander Vexstar of the Vorthan Syndicate, and you are badly outnumbered, primitive. Return to your quarantine system before I decide to add humans to my collection." The bridge crew tensed. They'd all heard stories about Vorthan slave markets, how they broke their victims ecologically before selling them to the highest bidder, how they kept detailed records of each species' breaking points, turning torture into a science. But Admiral Morgan just stood there, calm as a lake before a storm. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of a world that had survived ice ages, asteroid impacts, and global wars. "Commander Vexstar, I'm Admiral Jack Morgan of the Terran Defense Fleet. You have 30 seconds to release every prisoner you've taken from that merchant vessel, or I demonstrate why the Galactic Union was wise to quarantine Earth." Now here's where things get interesting, because Vexstar had never encountered a species that didn't immediately grovel when faced with superior numbers. His laugh echoed across the comm channel, a sound like breaking glass, mixed with distant screams. 30 seconds. The Vorthan commander's crest flared with genuine amusement. "Deathworlder, your primitive brain clearly cannot process simple mathematics. I command 83 combat vessels. You have... what, 47 toys? Even. Savages should understand those odds." Human bridge crew exchanged glances. They'd seen that look in their admiral's eyes before, the same expression a shark gets when it smells blood in the water. Jack's smile was the most terrifying thing Vexstar had ever seen. It wasn't cruel or sadistic like a Vorthan's grin. With something far worse, it was the smile of a professional who genuinely enjoyed his work. "You know what your problem is, Commander? You're thinking in terms of civilized warfare? Clean energy weapons, elegant tactics, honorable surrender protocols." He turned to his tactical officer without breaking eye contact with the alien. "Commander Brooks, Would you be so kind as to show our reptilian friend what happens when evolution arms a species with creativity, opposable thumbs, and a really bad attitude? Sarah Brooks' fingers danced across her console with deadly precision. Gladly, sir. All ships. This is Fleet Tactical. Target their forward vessels. Railgun batteries, full spread. Let's introduce them to kinetic warfare Terran style. Vorthan commander's expression shifted from amusement to confusion. Kinetic weapons? What barbaric nonsense! His words died as space erupted in violence. The human ships didn't fire elegant beams of coherent light or streams of superheated plasma. Instead, they launched solid tungsten rods, dense metal projectiles accelerated 2 significant fractions of light speed by electromagnetic rails. The projectiles were invisible until they struck. It's moving too fast for shields designed to deflect energy weapons. The first volley was surgical in its precision. 3 Vorthon destroyers simply ceased to exist, their shields offering no more protection than tissue paper against relativistic metal. The ships didn't explode in dramatic fireballs. They were there one moment, expanding clouds of superheated gas the next. The silence that followed was deafening. Impossible, Vexter whispered, his bioluminescent patterns flickering between confusion and terror. No civilized species uses solid projectiles. The energy requirements alone? That's your second mistake, Jack interrupted, his voice carrying across the channel like Judgment Day. Assuming we're civilized. See, Commander, humans learned warfare on a world that spent 4 billion years trying to kill us. We didn't develop elegant technologies, we developed ones that work. He gestured to his tactical display, where Vorthan ships were breaking formation in panic. Your shields are designed to deflect energy, but kinetic energy? That's just physics, and physics doesn't negotiate. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. Vorthan crews had never faced an enemy that could simply ignore their defenses. Their entire military doctrine was built around energy, weapons, and shield technology. Suddenly finding themselves vulnerable was like discovering fire could freeze. But that's barbaric, Vextar shrieked, his composure finally cracking. Kinetic weapons haven't been used in warfare for millennia. They single quotes, effective, Jack suggested helpfully. See, that's the thing about Deathworlders, Commander. We don't fight fair, we don't fight pretty, and we sure as hell don't fight by your rules. We fight to win. The remaining Vorthon ships began frantically repositioning, trying to put distance between themselves and the human fleet. But space is vast, and there's nowhere to hide when your enemy can hit you from across a solar system. Now then, Admiral Morgan continued, his voice taking on the tone of a patient teacher explaining simple concepts to a slow student. I believe I mentioned something about releasing prisoners. You have 23 seconds left to comply before we stop being polite about this. And in that moment, as 80 Vorthan ships faced down 47 human vessels, the galaxy learned a lesson it had forgotten during 3 centuries of quarantine. Sometimes the monsters in the cage aren't the ones you need to fear. Lieutenant Maria Rodriguez felt a surge of savage satisfaction as her targeting computer painted another Vorthan cruiser red. Her fingers moved across the tactical console with the practiced precision of a concert pianist, each keystroke delivering death across the void. The enemy vessel's weapon arrays disappeared in brief flashes of light as tungsten projectiles traveling at 12% of light speed turned sophisticated alien technology into expanding clouds of metallic vapor. Admiral, she called out, her voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Their defensive systems are completely inadequate against kinetic weapons. These shields might as well be made of tissue paper. It's like they forgot that momentum exists. Jack Morgan nodded with the grim satisfaction of a predator watching prey stumble into a perfectly laid trap. 3 centuries of isolation had taught humanity hard lessons about survival, while the rest of the galaxy had apparently spent that time getting comfortable. These Vorthon slavers represented everything he despised bullies who preyed on the weak, because they'd never faced anything stronger than themselves. You know what the problem is with most galactic civilizations? He mused, watching another enemy destroyer lose its forward weapons array. They've forgotten that war isn't about having the fanciest toys. It's about who wants to win more. The tactical display showed the battlefield in stark detail. 12 Vorthan ships drifted powerless, their crews frantically trying to restore systems that had been surgically removed by human railguns. The remaining enemy vessels were breaking formation, their commanders finally realizing they were facing something completely outside their understanding of modern warfare. But here's the thing about bullies. They never really learn until you hit them hard enough to rearrange their priorities permanently. Attention Vorthan fleet. Admiral Morgan's voice cut across all frequencies with the authority of a man who'd spent his career turning impossible situations into victory parades. You now have 10 seconds to transport every single prisoner back to the merchant vessel Golden Hope. After that countdown expires, we stop being gentle with you. The response came immediately, Commander Vextar's voice cracking like thin ice under pressure. Gentle? You call this gentle? You've destroyed 12 of our ships? Hundreds of my crew are dead? Jack's laugh was colder than the vacuum between stars. Commander, those were precision strikes against your weapon systems. If we'd wanted your crews dead, they'd be breathing vacuum right now. See? That's the difference between humans and slavers. We know the difference between neutralizing a threat and committing murder. He paused, letting that sink in while his tactical officer prepared the next phase of their demonstration. But since you seem confused about our capabilities, let me clarify something for you. Those 12 ships, those were warning shots. The bridge fell silent except for the soft hum of life support systems and the occasional beep from monitoring stations. Even his own crew seemed stunned by the casual way their admiral had just redefined the concept of restraint in naval warfare. Commander Blake, Jack called to his weapons officer, his voice carrying the same tone a parent might use when asking a child to pass the salt. Would you please prepare a full spread of nuclear torpedoes? I believe our reptilian friends need a more thorough education in human military doctrine. Lieutenant Commander Blake's hands froze over his console. Even among humans, nuclear weapons carried a weight that made grown warriors pause. Sir, confirm nuclear torpedo preparation? Confirmed? Full spread, all tubes, set yield 2. Let's say 15 megatons each. We want them to understand the conversation we're having here. The silence that followed wasn't just definite, was the kind of absolute quiet that happens when an entire sector of space holds its breath. Every communications officer on every ship within sensor range had just heard a human admiral casually order the preparation of weapons that defied galactic convention. You see, nuclear weapons occupied a special place in galactic nightmares. Most civilized species had abandoned such crude, destructive devices millennia ago in favor of clean, precise energy weapons. The idea of deliberately creating uncontrolled fusion reactions of weaponizing the same process that powered stars was considered barbaric beyond comprehension. But humans? Humans had not only developed nuclear weapons, they'd actually used them on themselves multiple times. The psychological profile reports from First Contact had driven Galactic Union psychologists to early retirement. Nuclear weapons? Vextar's voice climbed several octaves, his composure finally shattering completely. That's illegal under 17 different galactic conventions. No civilized species, there's that word again, Jack, interrupted with genuine amusement. Civilized. You keep using it like it means something to us. What? Little human history, Commander. We've survived ice ages that lasted centuries, asteroid impacts that would crack most planets, and diseases that killed half our population. We've fought wars with chemical weapons, biological weapons, and yes, NUCLEA are weapons. The Admiral's expression hardened. And suddenly, every alien on every ship in the battle zone understood why the Galactic Union had quarantined Earth. We didn't develop these weapons to be civilized, Commander. We developed them to survive. Right now, survival means making sure slavers like you understand there are consequences for preying on innocent traders. The tactical display showed the human torpedo tubes cycling through their loading sequence. Each warhead contained enough destructive power to crack a small moon, and the Terran fleet carried enough of them to glass an entire world. But here's what really makes nuclear weapons special. Jack continued conversationally, as if discussing the weather instead of instruments of mass destruction. They don't care about your shields, your armor, or your superior numbers. They just make everything in their vicinity very, very hot for a very brief period of time. Commander Vextar's voice came across the channel as barely more than a terrified whisper. Please, ... we surrender. We're beaming back the prisoners now. All of them. Please don't. Smart choice, Admiral Morgan replied, his tone returning to professional courtesy. Maria, confirm prisoner transport.
Blake, maintain torpedo.
Lock but do not fire unless I give direct authorization. The next 30 seconds stretched like years as Vorthan transport beams activated across the fleet, returning captured crew members to the merchant vessel Golden Hope. Each successful transport was another small victory against the darkness that plagued the Outer Rim territories. Admiral Lieutenant Rodriguez reported, all prisoners have been successfully transported. The merchant vessel confirms all crew members are accounted for and unharmed. Jack nodded with satisfaction, but his expression remained stern, because sometimes winning the battle was only the beginning of the real war, the war for hearts and minds that would determine whether the galaxy learned to fear human justice or simply learned to fear humans. Excellent. Now comes the interesting part, deciding what we do with 80-plus Vorthan warships full of slavers who've just learned that the quarantine wasn't designed to keep us in. Captain Nex stood on the transport pad of his battered merchant vessel, watching in stunned disbelief as his crew members materialized one by one in columns of shimmering light. Each face that emerged from the Vorthon transport beams carried the same expression of shocked relief, a look of beings who had expected to die in alien slave pits but instead found themselves breathing free air again. Young Engineer Crick stumbled as he materialized, his legs shaking so badly he could barely stand. The kid had been in Vorthan custody for 6 hours, but his eyes carried the hollow stare of someone who'd seen his future as a piece of property and somehow lived to escape it. Navigator Zelka appeared next, her usually pristine uniform torn and stained, but her proud bearing intact. One by one, 37 crew members returned from what should have been a one-way journey to hell. All crew accounted for, Captain, reported his communications officer, with tears streaming down his scaled cheeks. They're all here. They're all alive. But even as Vex celebrated this impossible miracle, a part of his mind remained focused on the viewport where the human fleet hung in space, like a collection of predatory sharks. These weren't the elegant vessels he'd expected from Galactic naval forces. These ships looked like they'd been designed by engineers who understood that space was hostile and that pretty holes didn't win battles. The transport beam activated again, but this time it carried something that made Vex's blood run cold. 3 figures materialized on his bridge tall. Bipedal creatures with pale skin and forward-facing eyes that screamed apex predator. To every survival instinct evolution had given him, Admiral Jack Morgan stepped forward with the fluid grace of something that had never known what it meant to be prey. His uniform was simple, functional, bearing none of the ornate decorations favored by galactic naval officers. Behind him stood 2 Marines who moved like coiled springs, their hands resting casually near weapon grips with the unconscious confidence of beings who had never met a problem they couldn't solve with superior firepower. Captain Nex, the human, said, his voice carrying an authority that seemed to fill the entire bridge. I'm Admiral Jack Morgan of the Terran Defense Fleet. Are your people safe and accounted for? Vex found his voice somehow, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. Yes, Admiral. All 37 crew members returned unharmed. We owe you our lives, but I must ask why. Did you come? The quarantine protocols established by the Galactic Union explicitly forbid the humans' expression shifted, and suddenly, Vex understood why the galaxy had been so eager to lock these creatures away. It wasn't cruelty he saw in those pale eyes, it was something far more dangerous. It was the absolute certainty of a being who had never learned to accept defeat. Captain Jack said, his voice taking on the patient tone of someone explaining simple concepts to a child. Let me tell you something about humans that apparently got lost in all those classified reports. We evolved on a world that spent 4 billion years trying to exterminate us. Ice ages that lasted millennia. Predators that made Vorthan slavers look like gentle schoolchildren. Diseases that killed half our population before breakfast. Admiral moved to the viewport, gazing out at the drifting Vorthan vessels with the satisfaction of a job well done. We survived asteroid impacts that cracked continents. We endured wars where entire nations disappeared overnight. We faced extinction more times than our historians can count, and every single time, we looked death in the eye and said, "Not today." One of the Marines, a woman with scars across her knuckles and eyes like winter storms, spoke up with a slight smile. "The captain's being modest, sir. Don't forget we also survived ourselves. Takes a special kind of species to split the atom and immediately think, let's make this into a weapon." Jack chuckled, sound that somehow made the bridge feel both safer and more dangerous at the same time. "Good point, Sergeant Chen. But that's exactly what I'm talking about." Captain Nex. "Humans learned one fundamental truth that apparently the rest of the galaxy forgot. You protect the pack, always, no matter the cost." He gestured toward the tactical display where 80+ Vorthon ships hung powerless in space, their crews frantically trying to repair systems that had been surgically removed by human weapons. Those slavers made a critical error in judgment. They assumed that because we were quarantined, we were contained. They forgot that some cages aren't built to keep the dangerous things in. They're built to keep everyone else safe from what happens when those dangerous things get loose. Captain Nex felt his knees go weak. "But Admiral, the Galactic Union will be furious when they learn of this intervention. The non-interference accords. The quarantine protocols, breaking them is an act of war against the entire galactic community." The second Marine, a mountain of a man with arms like tree trunks, let out a bark of laughter. "Captain, with all due respect, the Galactic Union had 3 centuries to stop slavers from operating in their territory. How's that working out for everyone?" Jack nodded grimly. Sergeant Williams raises an excellent point. "See, Captain, humans have a saying, evil triumphs when good people do nothing. The Union created a nice, orderly galaxy where civilized species could trade in comfort while turning a blind eye to what happened in the Outer Rim territories." His voice hardened, carrying the weight of moral authority that made even hardened warriors step back. "They quarantined us, not because we were evil, but because we refused to ignore evil when we saw it. Because when humans encounter slavers, pirates, or anyone who preys on the innocent, we don't file diplomatic protests or form committee to study the problem. We load our weapons, and we end the problem." The communications console chimed softly, and Nex's officer looked up with wide eyes. "Captain, I'm receiving reports from across the sector. Human fleets are appearing everywhere: the Kepler Nebula, Rigel trade routes, the Centauri shipping lanes. They're engaging pirate and slaver operations throughout the Outer Rim." A slow smile spread across Admiral Morgan's face, and Nex realized he was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. This wasn't just a rescue mission. It was a declaration of independence from a system that had failed to protect the innocent. "Word travels fast in the age of quantum communications," Jack said with satisfaction. "Right now, every slaver, pirate, and flesh merchant in known space is learning a new reality. The quarantine is over. Humanity is back. And we remember every species that ever needed protection but couldn't find it from their own governments." Turned back to Captain Nex. And for the first time since this nightmare began, the merchant captain felt something he hadn't dared hope for in years: genuine safety. "Captain, you and your crew are free to continue your journey. But know this: the Outer Rim territories are under new management now. Anyone who preys on innocent traders will discover what happens when you threaten something a human considers worth protecting." As the human admiral and his marines prepared to beam back to their ship, Dex realized he was witnessing the end of one era and the violent birth of another. The question that would haunt galactic leaders for generations was simple. What do you do when the monsters you locked away turn out to be the heroes the galaxy desperately needed? The Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Union had witnessed many historic moments in its 1,000-year history, but never had the vast chamber hummed with this particular mixture of tension and anticipation. Representatives from over 300 worlds filled the tiered seating, their varied forms creating a tapestry of galactic civilization, crystalline beings that chimed softly when they moved, gaseous entities contained in environmental suits, and countless variations of carbon-based life that had evolved under alien suns At the center of it all stood Captain Nex, his scaled hands gripping the speaker's podium as he faced an audience that held the fate of the galaxy in their collective decisions. 6 months had passed since the incident at Proxima Drift, and the ripple effects had shattered centuries of established order. "Honored representatives," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic enhancement systems. "I stand before you not as a victim, but as a witness to the most significant shift in galactic politics since the formation of this very union." The silence was absolute. Even the gaseous collective had stilled their perpetual atmospheric churning to listen. "The humans didn't just save my crew that day," Dex continued, his voice gaining strength with each word. "Fundamentally altered the balance of power in our galaxy. In the 6 months since their intervention, piracy in the Outer Rim territories has dropped by 92%. Slave markets that operated openly for centuries have shuttered their doors across 3 entire sectors." A ripple of whispered conversations swept through the assembly. The economic implications alone were staggering. Entire industries, built on suffering, had simply vanished overnight. Council Leader Vexstar, yes, the same Vorthon who had commanded the slaver fleet, shifted uncomfortably in his restraint chair. His trial had been swift and decisive, but the Union had granted him the right to witness these proceedings before his sentencing. The once proud commander now looked like a broken shell of his former self, his bioluminescent patterns dim with defeat. "But Captain," interrupted Representative Zephyr of the Altarian Trade Confederation, her crystalline form resonating with concern, "surely you understand the broader implications? These humans have violated every treaty, every protocol that maintains galactic stability. They've acted as judge, jury, and executioner across sovereign space." Dex nodded slowly. "You're absolutely right, Representative. They have violated our protocols. And thank the cosmic void they did, because our protocols were failing." The chamber erupted in shocked murmurs. A merchant captain had just challenged the fundamental principles of galactic governance in front of the most powerful beings in known space. "Let me share some numbers with you," Dex continued, pulling up a holographic display that filled the air above the assembly floor. "In the past decade, the Union received over 14,000 distress calls from the Outer Rim territories. Our response rate? 12%. Of those responses, how many resulted in successful rescue operations? 3%. The display shifted, showing shipping lane maps painted in red zones where merchant vessels faced constant threats. Meanwhile, human intervention forces have responded to over 200 distress calls in 6 months with a success rate of 100%. Not 90%. Not 99%. Every single merchant vessel, every single passenger liner, every single scientific expedition that called for help received it." Council Leader Vex leaned forward in his ornate chair, his ancient features creased with concern. "Captain Nex, your gratitude is understandable. We must address the fundamental question. Do these Deathworlders represent a threat to galactic peace and stability?" The chamber fell silent again, waiting for an answer that would shape policy for generations to come. Dex looked around the vast assembly, seeing fear in hundreds of alien eyes. Fear of the unknown, fear of change, fear of beings who had proven that the established order wasn't as unshakable as everyone believed. "Honored Counselor," he said carefully, "humans are without question the most dangerous species I have ever encountered. They possess weapons that ignore our defenses, tactics that bypass our strategies, and a psychological profile that defies our understanding of rational behavior." The tension in the chamber was so thick you could cut it with a plasma torch. Dex continued, his voice rising with conviction. "They are only dangerous to those who prey upon the innocent. In 6 months of operation, human forces have not conquered a single world, claimed a single system, or demanded tribute from a single government. They don't want our territory, our resources, or our submission." He gestured to the display, which now showed shipping routes glowing green with safety. "What they want is something far more revolutionary. They want to live in a galaxy where merchants can trade without fear, where families can travel without being enslaved, where the strong protect the weak instead of exploiting them." "Representative, Mordok, of the Silicon Hegemony, towering crystal being whose thoughts manifested as colored light patterns, pulsed with skeptical amber hues. Yet surely, Captain, such power concentrated in the hands of a single species poses existential risks. What happens when their interests conflict with ours? Before Vex could answer, an aide rushed into the chamber, carrying an urgent message pad. The young Centaurian whispered something to Council Leader Vex, whose expression shifted from concern to amazement. "Ladies, gentlemen, and honored beings," Vex announced, his voice carrying across the chamber, "I've just received a priority communication. From the vegan system, the Hegemony of Worlds has formally announced the end of their neutrality pact and requested human protection for their trade routes." The chamber exploded in shocked voices. The Hegemony had maintained strict neutrality for over 2 centuries, refusing all military alliances. But the announcements weren't finished. Reports flooded in from across the galaxy, the Rigel Commerce Guild requesting human escorts, the free worlds of Andromeda offering basing rights to human fleets, even the isolationist Tau Ceti Republic opening diplomatic channels with Earth for the first time in 300 years. "You see," Captain Nex said, his voice cutting through the chaos, "this isn't conquest, it's liberation. Species that have suffered in silence for generations are finally finding their voice because someone is willing to listen." Meanwhile, in the depths of space beyond the Centauri cluster, Admiral Jack Morgan stood on the bridge of the Defiant, reading yet another distress call that had just reached his communications array. This one came from a scientific expedition trapped by Hegemony raiders near the galactic core. It's the same raiders who had been operating with impunity for decades because they paid tribute to the right council members. "Admiral, his communications?" Officer reported the science vessel Discovery is requesting immediate assistance. 23 researchers on board, including a team of xenobiologists studying primitive life forms. Jack's smile was the same predatory expression that had terrified Commander Vexstar 6 months ago. Well, looks like the Hegemony raiders haven't gotten the message yet. He turned to his crew, seeing the same fierce determination in there. Eyes that had carried humanity through ice ages and world wars. "All ships, prepare for hyperspace jump. Set course for the Centauri cluster. It appears someone else needs to learn what happens when you threaten innocent people in a galaxy under human protection." The Defiant and her escort fleet disappeared into hyperspace, leaving only the faint distortion patterns that marked another chapter in humanity's expansion across the stars. The age of human guardianship had begun, and across the galaxy. Predators were learning to fear the night while prey animals finally learned to hope. In the assembly hall, as representatives debated and argued about protocols and procedures, 1. Truth had become crystal clear. The quarantine hadn't failed because humans were too dangerous to contain. It had failed because sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is try to cage the species the galaxy needs most. The Deathworlders were free, and they would never again allow innocents to suffer in silence while bureaucrats debated the proper procedures for doing what was right. The END